Well, it's early August, and it's going to be a hot one today, and a lot of people are really struggling with the weather. Well, I'm going to talk about one of the latest pickups that we've had at a military sale back just a little while ago, and something very, very unusual, and it has a lot to do with the history, especially pioneer history. I want to talk about these gloves, and these gloves belong to one Richard, or I better call him Admiral Byrd, one of the early pioneers of this country, a contemporary of Charlie Lindbergh, but he's better known for his explorations of the Arctic and the Antarctic.
Richard Evelyn Byrd Jr., better known as Admiral Byrd for most historians. Born in 1888, Byrd was an American naval officer, a pioneering American aviator, and polar explorer. In 1912, Byrd graduated from the Naval Academy and he was commissioned as a lowly ensign. Once he got assigned to the gunboat USS Dolphin, which also served as the boat for the Secretary of the Navy, he became, let's say, familiar with many high-ranking officials, including future President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. During World War I, he was sent to flight school where he qualified as a naval aviator. In 1921, Byrd volunteered to attempt a solo, nonstop crossing of the Atlantic Ocean. This was well before Charles Lindbergh's historic flight of 1927, but the idea was scrapped by the then Secretary of the Navy, Theodore Roosevelt Jr. Byrd commanded the aviation team of the Arctic expedition to North Greenland. He flew to the North Pole in 1926. Byrd was one of several aviators to compete for the Arctic Prize in 1927 for making the first non-stop flight between the United States and France. We all know who ended up making that first flight, one Charles Lindbergh. In 1928, Byrd began his first expedition to the Antarctic. As a result of the work he did, he was promoted to the rank of Rear Admiral on December 21st, 1929. As he was only 41 at the time, he became the youngest admiral in the history of the U.S. Navy. On his second expedition in the summer of 1933-34, he spent 5 months alone operating a meteorological station in the Antarctic. You can imagine what it was like back in those days, extremely cold, isolated, very tough to survive, showing what we call a lot of fortitude, one Admiral Byrd.
And we picked up these gloves and some boots at a sale. It actually came from his wife Marie's estate after he passed away. Picked these up, and these originally were sold in 1988. And so we're going to look a little bit more at this nice piece of history that came from Admiral Byrd personally. Well, the first item on the sale that we picked up are a pair of these boots. They're called mucklucks, and were usually made by indigenous people. You can see the outside here has actually got hair on it. Usually comes from reindeer or caribou on the outside. Skin on the bottom could be seal skin, or it could be the skin of a deer or caribou. And would have probably been pretty cold on the inside. These obviously are Admiral Byrd's because Byrd's situated there, but would have probably stuffed these with other things to keep his feet warm, because right now the way they look, they're not very warm, but definitely Admiral Byrd's, from the same estate as the gloves. And so that's kind of an interesting little addition to this. Okay, the mittens are kind of interesting because they're not made by indigenous people. They were actually made by a company out of New York City. Bloverson's Sons out of New York City, probably a furrier. And I believe you're going to find out that the covering on them is probably seal. And really a nice, pretty warm pair. Keep your fingers as warm as possible back in those early days, early pioneer days. From Admiral Byrd again, and this is marked right there, the same as the boots. So no question that these did belong to Richard Admiral Byrd back in the day when he was exploring the Arctic and Antarctic, especially Antarctica.